$20,000 does not sound like a life-changing number. It is not a million. It is not quit your job money. It is not even buy a house money in most of America. And yet, something strange happens to a woman the moment her savings, her investments, or her net worth crosses that exact line. Nobody warns her about it. Nobody writes a headline about it. But almost every woman who has crossed it will tell you the same thing, usually with a confused little laugh, like they just noticed something about themselves for the first time. So let's talk about it. Not the version influencers give you, with the soft piano music and the manifest your abundance nonsense. The real version. The slightly uncomfortable, slightly funny, very human version of what actually happens in a woman's head once she stops living paycheck to paycheck and starts sitting on 20 grand. Here is the part nobody tells you. Most women assume the big shift happens later. At 6 figures. At financial independence. At I never have to work again money. They assume $20,000 is just a stop on the way, a number too small to matter, a rounding error on the road to something bigger. But ask any woman who has actually sat there, watching that number in her account for the first time, and she will tell you it hit different than she expected. Not because of what it could buy, because of what it did to the way she saw herself. That is the hidden truth of the $20,000 rule. It is not a spending threshold. It is a psychological one. Before that number, most women operate from a place we can only describe as financial survival mode. Every decision is reactive. Can I afford this? Will this bounce? Should I wait until Friday? The brain, whether we like to admit it or not, treats money scarcity the same way it treats any other threat. It keeps you alert, a little anxious, a little defensive, constantly scanning for the next problem. Confidence in that state is borrowed, not owned. A woman can act confident in survival mode. She can dress the part, talk the part, post the part. But underneath, there is a quiet hum of what if, running in the background of everything she does. $20,000 turns that hum down, not off, down. And here is where it gets interesting because the shift is not really about the dollar amount at all. It is about what that dollar amount represents to the nervous system. $20,000 is usually the first amount that feels like a buffer instead of a balance. It is enough to cover an emergency without panic. Enough to walk away from a bad job, a bad landlord, a bad situation, without collapsing financially. It is the first number that whispers you have options instead of you have obligations. And the moment a woman's brain registers that whisper, her entire posture toward life quietly changes, even if nothing on the outside looks different yet. This is where most people expect the video to turn into a lecture about compound interest. It will not, because the real transformation after $20,000 has almost nothing to do with math and everything to do with identity. Think about how a woman describes herself before she has any real savings. She often describes herself through her hustle. I work hard. I'm a grinder. I do what I have to do. There is pride in that, and it is earned pride, but it is also a survival identity. It is built on effort, not on security. Once $20,000 sits quietly in an account somewhere, something subtle starts to replace that identity. She starts to describe herself differently, even in her own head. Not, I work hard for my money. More like, I'm someone who has her life together. It sounds like a small difference. It is not. One identity is built on proving something. The other is built on simply being something. And that shift in language, that shift in self-talk, changes decisions long before it changes bank statements. Let's slow down here because this is where the $20,000 rule gets genuinely fascinating and where most people stop paying attention right when it matters most. Once a woman has that first real cushion, her relationship with fear changes shape. Fear does not disappear, and anyone telling you it magically vanishes at $20,000 is selling you something. What actually happens is fear gets rerouted. Before the cushion, fear points inward. Am I enough? Am I behind? Am I failing? After the cushion, fear starts pointing outward, toward decisions instead of identity. Should I take this opportunity? Should I negotiate harder? Should I finally say no to something that has been draining me for years? The fear becomes strategic instead of existential. That is a massive upgrade, even though nobody throws a party for it. And this is exactly where things get complicated in a way most people never see coming. Because once fear becomes strategic instead of existential, a woman starts noticing things she used to tolerate. Underpayment, disrespect at work, situations she stayed in simply because she could not afford to leave them. $20,000 does not just build a financial cushion. It builds a walking away fund. And once a woman knows, deep down, that she can walk away from something, she starts evaluating everything through that lens. Is this worth staying for? Or am I only staying because I have no choice? That single mental shift is quietly responsible for more career moves, more boundary setting, and more life changes than any motivational quote ever will be. Now here's the twist, the part that flips the whole conversation on its head, because up to this point it sounds like $20,000 solves everything. It does not. The uncomfortable truth is that the $20,000 rule does not just change what a woman is willing to accept from others. It changes what she is willing to accept from herself, and that is a much harder adjustment than anyone expects. Before the cushion, low expectations feel protective. If you expect very little, disappointment stings less. But once a woman has proof that she can build something, however small, the excuse of "I just can't" quietly disappears. And losing that excuse is strangely more uncomfortable than staying broke ever was. It is easier to blame circumstances than to sit with the truth that you now have room to do more, and the only thing standing between you and the next level is you. This is the part almost nobody talks about because it is not aspirational content. It is not a highlight reel. It is the slightly awkward middle chapter where a woman has just enough to feel different but not enough to feel done. She is too far along to relate to the version of herself who is drowning, but nowhere near the version of herself she is trying to become. It is an identity no man's land, and it is honestly one of the most psychologically uncomfortable stages of building anything, financial or otherwise. If you are the type of woman who finds this kind of thing genuinely interesting, the quiet psychology behind money, confidence, fear, and the way our bank accounts secretly shape our self-image, this channel exists exactly for that conversation. Subscribing simply keeps you in the loop for more of this. Let's go back to the $20,000 mark, because once a woman moves through that uncomfortable middle stage, something else starts happening that catches almost everyone off guard. She starts noticing money everywhere, not because she suddenly has more of it, but because her brain has started categorizing it differently. Before, money was mostly a tool for survival. Rent, groceries, gas. After, money starts becoming a tool for decisions. Should I put this toward growth or toward comfort? Should I take the slightly risky opportunity or the safe one? The questions get more sophisticated because the woman asking them has finally earned the right to ask them at all. Scarcity does not leave room for strategy. It only leaves room for reaction. There is also a quieter, less flattering side to this shift that deserves honesty instead of sugarcoating. Some women, once they hit that $20,000 mark, become almost obsessive about protecting it. The fear of losing what took so long to build can be just as paralyzing as the fear of never having anything at all. This is the point where ambition and anxiety start looking suspiciously similar from the outside, even though they feel completely different on the inside. One pushes a woman forward. The other quietly keeps her stuck, dressed up as caution. Learning to tell the difference between smart protection and fear disguised as strategy is, frankly, one of the harder emotional skills nobody teaches. And here is where the stakes rise again, because this is not really a conversation about $20,000 anymore. It never was. It is a conversation about the moment a woman stops asking, "How do I survive?" and starts asking, "Who am I allowed to become?" That question is heavier than any number in a bank account, and it is the real reason this particular financial milestone hits so differently than the ones that come before it. Confidence, real confidence, the kind that does not need an audience to validate it, tends to start showing up right around here. Not loud confidence. Not the performative kind people post online. Quiet confidence. The kind that shows up in a woman's tone of voice during a negotiation. The kind that shows up when she is offered less than she deserves and, for the first time, actually says something about it instead of swallowing it to keep the peace. $20,000 alone does not create that confidence. But it gives it somewhere safe to grow, and that is arguably the more valuable outcome of the whole thing. There is also a sharper, more sarcastic truth buried in all of this, and it deserves to be said plainly. Society spends an enormous amount of energy telling women that ambition is unattractive, that wanting more money makes you cold, that a woman who talks about her savings account is somehow less warm, less nurturing, less likable. And yet the same society is shocked, genuinely shocked, when a woman with $20,000 in the bank suddenly stops accepting nonsense she used to accept without question. Funny how that works. It turns out financial security was never about greed. It was about leverage. And leverage has always made people uncomfortable when it belongs to someone who is never supposed to have it in the first place. So where does this actually leave a woman standing at that $20,000 mark, somewhere between the survival version of herself and whoever she is building next? It leaves her in a strange, honest, unglamorous middle place. Slightly more confident, slightly more cautious, slightly more aware of how much of her old identity was built entirely around not having enough. It leaves her asking better questions instead of just working harder for the same old answers. It leaves her noticing, often for the first time, that the goal was never really the number. The number was only ever proof. Proof that she could build something out of nothing. Proof that discipline works even when nobody is watching. Proof that the woman who used to check her balance with a small knot in her stomach is not the same woman checking it now. And maybe that is the actual $20,000 rule, the one nobody puts in a headline because it does not sound impressive enough on its own. The money is never really the milestone. The milestone is the version of a woman who exists on the other side of building it. Calmer, sharper, slightly less afraid, slightly more herself. Still not finished, still not there. Wherever there even is, but undeniably, unmistakably different. There is one more layer to this that almost never gets discussed, and it has nothing to do with confidence or fear. It has to do with boredom of all things. Once a woman crosses that $20,000 line, a strange kind of restlessness tends to show up right behind it. The scramble is over, at least for now, and in the quiet that follows, she is left alone with a question she never had time to ask before. Now what? Survival mode is exhausting, but it is also, in a twisted way, comforting because it keeps you too busy to sit with bigger questions about purpose or direction. Take the emergency away, and suddenly there is a lot of empty space where the panic used to live. Some women fill that space with ambition. Some fill it with new anxieties, manufactured just to keep themselves occupied in familiar territory. And some, for the first time in years, simply sit still with it, uncomfortable as that stillness might be. It is worth being a little blunt here, because this is the part where the sarcasm earns its place. Financial advice loves to pretend that once you hit a savings milestone, your brain automatically becomes a calm, rational, spreadsheet-loving adult. It does not. The same woman who spent years stretching $40 until it screamed can, without much warning, turn around and spend an unreasonable amount of energy debating whether she deserves a slightly nicer version of something she has needed for years. Scarcity leaves fingerprints. Deprivation does not evaporate just because the number in the account got bigger. It lingers, quietly negotiating with every purchase, every investment, every decision to finally spend money on herself instead of everyone else first. And that, honestly, is the twist inside the twist. $20,000 does not just test a woman's discipline. It tests her sense of worth. Because there is a very specific kind of guilt that shows up right around the stage, the guilt of having enough while still remembering exactly what it felt like to have nothing. Some women respond to that guilt by giving too much away, propping up everyone around them instead of reinforcing their own foundation. Others respond by hoarding every dollar out of sheer terror that the cushion is temporary, that it could vanish as quickly as it appeared. Neither response is irrational. Both are simply old survival wiring trying to make sense of a completely new situation. What tends to separate the women who keep building from the women who quietly stall out right here is not intelligence, and it is definitely not luck. It is the willingness to sit in that uncomfortable middle without rushing to explain it away. The ones who keep moving are usually the ones who stop asking how do I get back to feeling safe and start asking what does safe actually let me do now. That single reframe, small as it sounds, tends to be the real dividing line between a woman who treats $20,000 as a finish line and a woman who treats it as a launch pad. There is also something worth saying about how the outside world starts reacting to a woman around this point, and it is rarely as encouraging as people assume. A woman who suddenly seems calmer, more selective, less desperate for approval, tends to unsettle people who got used to her being available, agreeable, and easy to underpay. This has very little to do with jealousy in the cartoonish sense people love to joke about. It has more to do with the simple fact that people build relationships around a certain version of you, and when that version starts changing, some of those dynamics quietly stop fitting the way they used to. Nobody warns you about that part either. Nobody puts it on a motivational poster. But it is real, and it is one of the more disorienting side effects of building any kind of security from a place that used to have none. None of this means $20,000 is some magic threshold that instantly fixes self-worth, erases anxiety, or guarantees good decisions from here on out. It does not. What it does is remove one very specific, very loud excuse. The excuse that says none of this matters because there is no cushion anyway, so why bother being strategic? Why bother saying no? Why bother asking for more? Once that excuse is gone, a woman is left facing herself a little more directly than before, and that, more than any dollar amount, tends to be the real turning point. $20,000 will not change your life, but it will change the woman deciding what happens next with it. And once that shift happens, there is no real going back to who she was before she knew what she was capable of.